helping everyone live better longer. On behalf of our organizers and partners, it's a pleasure to see so many of you here today for what promises to be a truly historic 3 days. A global meeting of scientists, clinicians, innovators, and leaders, all focused on one shared mission: extending the healthy years of life for people everywhere. Before we begin, I'd like to take a few minutes to cover some important housekeeping items. First, we kindly ask that you take this opportunity to silence your phones. If you need to take a call, please step out into the foyer before beginning your conversation. We've built 30-minute breaks into each day. We'll do our best to stay on schedule so that everybody has time to connect and recharge, and we'd appreciate your help in returning promptly to your seats at the end of each break so our next speaker can begin on time. Tea and coffee stations are available at the front of each side of the room, and you can help yourself at any time, but we also ask that you keep conversations again to the foyer during sessions so that our speakers are not disrupted. Now, on your table, you're going to find a card, and there are two things that you need to know about it. One is our event app that we're using. There's a QR code. So when you get the opportunity, please scan that QR code and sign up for the event app. This will give you instant access to the full schedule of the summit and all of the session details. Inside the app, you'll also find a link to Slido, which is what we'll be using for questions and answers during each session. On the other side of the card is another QR code. If you want to scan this at any time just to ask a question, you may do so without using the app. So this is a quick way to submit your questions. You can submit a question anytime during the speaker's presentation. They'll go into a queue, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of each speaker's talk. Now, also located at the back of each room are charging stations for your laptops and other electronic devices. And finally, please keep your badges visible at all times for re-entry. Okay, now that everything's settled, it's time to begin. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage Mr. Damien Adam, co-founder of the Mauritius Longevity Summit, whose vision for a healthier, longer-lived Mauritius has inspired and guided every part of this initiative. Please join me in warmly welcoming Damien Adam.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow innovators and pioneers of the future, welcome to the Mauritius Longevity Summit. On behalf of the Advanced Medical Learning Center, it is my great honor to welcome you to this first edition of the summit. Before anything else, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of our distinguished guests who have traveled from near and far to be with us today. Your presence is really a testament of the global significance of what we're building here today. To our international speakers and scientists, thank you for believing that a small nation can be a leader in longevity science. To our local clinicians, specialists, educators, and researchers, thank you for your commitment to caring for our people. To our private clinics, hospitals, sponsors, and partners, thank you for standing with us as we push healthcare forward. And finally, to the organizing team and AMLC family, thank you for making this possible. I have 3 key messages for you today. Mauritius is at a crossroad. We are a nation where 1 in 5 Mauritians live with diabetes. 1 in 4 have hypertension, and 1 in 700 is on dialysis. Finally, chronic diseases consume over 75% of our healthcare budget. This is not just a medical problem. It's a social, economic, and generational challenge. And for many years, our healthcare system has been focused on treating disease rather than preventing it. The second message is that there's a challenge, but it also presents an opportunity. Around the world, the most forward-thinking nations are shifting from sick care to health care, from waiting and fearing disease to investing in prevention and longevity. And today, Mauritius will have the tools and the knowledge to join that movement. With our size, cohesion, medical talent, and the will of our people, we can become one of the first longevity nations in the world. A country where citizens live longer, stronger, healthier lives. And the final message is that this is the start of a movement. It's not just a conference. A movement to make prevention the new norm, empower clinicians with the latest science, reduce the burden of disease, and give every Mauritian a chance not just to live longer, but better. Everyone in this room, doctors, scientists, innovators, entrepreneurs, community leaders, journalists, and students, we all have a role to play. Together, we can reshape the future of health in Mauritius. So, this summit is really about inspiration, conversation, and action. Over the next days, you'll discover the science of living longer and healthier. What actually works and why. Simple habits, practical steps you can take today to add healthy years to your life. Early detection, how to catch disease early when it's easier to act. How communities can help. What workplaces, schools, and groups can do to support health. And finally, Mauritius' opportunity. How we can become a leader in healthy living in our region. Our goal is simple. We want to make new knowledge available to you, inspire you, and provide you with all of the tools to make that possible. Together, we can build a healthier, stronger, more vibrant nation. And together, we can add life to years, and not just years to life. Thank you.
And now our first keynote speaker, someone who has devoted his career to unlocking the science of healthy longevity for all people. Dr. Mahmoud Khan is the Chief Executive Officer of the Evolution Foundation, a global organization investing in research and innovation to extend healthy lifespan and make longevity science accessible worldwide. His leadership bridges the worlds of healthcare, philanthropy, and science, and his vision is both bold and inclusive. Today he'll be sharing insights on how we can increase health span for everyone, not just in advanced economies, but across the world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mahmoud Khan.
Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum, namaste, whatever your greeting is. It's truly a pleasure, an honor. My first visit to this part of the world, and what a beautiful place to live in. I'm truly impressed. I'm going to talk to you about the work we're doing at evolution. And actually, I would say it's the work that is being done around the world that we as Evolution and my team have a chance to support, promote, accelerate where we can. So really, this represents the work of many of the speakers included that are going to follow. So my job is sort of the warm-up to what you're going to hear. The field of aging research is centuries old. This is something that is not new, and over 100 years ago in the UK, scientists started to ask the question, not about the elixir of youth, but how do we understand aging as a biological process? And of course, there have been seminal landmarks that have happened. The fundamental question that still remains is, how's it going to change and impact humans? When we were created, and the vision of His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed, the Crown Prince and Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, to whom, who is my chairman and I report, was very clear, which is we're not focused on extending life, we're focused on extending healthy life. And that's an important thing, as you can see on this slide. This is about health span. This is about how long we stay healthy, not how long we live. And if it means that life is going to get extended, so be it. But that's not the primary goal. And that's important because a lot of people confuse the two as the same thing. Very quickly, where are we today? Very straightforward. If we look around the world, years of life are about 73 years on average. We spend about 10 years of our life with disease, with increasing decline in our body functions. Wherever you look in the world, it's about 10 years. Africa has one of the shortest life expectancies in the world, but still, at the end of the life, about 10 years is spent with disease of some that you've just heard about: diabetes, cardiovascular disease, age-related cancers, etc. This, of course, was not always the case. The way we used to think about the world was a lot of young people supporting the lives of a few older people. That has changed. Here is the changing population demographics as we look around over the years, men and women shown as we see. The world's population is getting older. That pyramid has become a cylinder, and of course is projected to become an inverted cylinder. Fewer and fewer young people, a lot more older people. And the question that is posed now to most leaders is not a science question. It's a socioeconomic question, which is, how is society going to support this growing population of older people, which today we have 1 billion people over the age of 60 around the world. By 2050 or so, it's going to be 2 billion. The world's population is not going to double, but the dependency ratio, that is the number of people, young people have to take care of, is going to itself dramatically change. And that is what evolution has been focusing on. How do we think about this from a global challenge, and what are the solutions? I'll talk a little bit about how we do this, but something on Mauritius. Not surprisingly, for a developed economy, which is really, Mauritius has to be congratulated, it is a standout in this part of the world in terms of how the economy has been developed. It's a strong economy, good infrastructure, good health systems, but look at your population demographics. What has changed dramatically is a population that is now aging in place, and with it, the diseases that come. This is not just unique to here. I can tell you, for example, in the Middle East, we always think of Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries, as a young population. That is true. The population of Saudi Arabia today, 50% of the population is under 25, 60% is under 30. 2/3 of the population of Saudi Arabia is under 30. So you think, why would Saudi Arabia think about aging? The reality of it is the birth rate in Saudi Arabia used to be about 6 children per couple. Today it is 2.7. The replacement rate is 2.17. We are very close now, where Saudi Arabia's population is about plateauing. It will then do what is happening in Mauritius now, where the projection for Mauritius is for the next 15, 20 years, the population will start to fall, and by 2050 is expected to significantly fall for 2 reasons: declining birth rate and increasing life expectancy. So the good news is public health systems have been successful. The challenge they've been created now is, how do you deal with this? Europe is dealing with this, the United States is dealing with this, the UK is dealing with this, but this is the implication from a health system point of view. If you look on the left here, you will see that if we look at age on the horizontal axis versus diseases on the vertical, look what happens. Around age 40 or so, the risk of diabetes starts to go up. We've seen that already in Mauritius. You're seeing it. We're seeing it in the Middle East. We're seeing it across Asia and Europe, North America in particular. Somewhere around age 50, you start to see cardiovascular risk and cancer around age 65 onwards suddenly takes off. So as your population increases, this is what is to be expected if we do nothing else. And of course, it's not one disease. They're all dramatically, exponentially increasing in risk. And that is a challenge for healthcare systems. This is not unique, but the opportunity is how do we address this without what you see on the right side. On the right side, you'll see healthcare expenditure on the horizontal axis versus adjusted life expectancy, or if we think about it, health adjusted, right? What's the ROI? And as you see on the vertical axis there, after about $2,500 per person, there is no increase in return. In other words, spending more in the health system doesn't change that variable. And so always, all the way to the right, that one dot you'll see on the right is the United States. Then you see Europe, etc., and all the way to the left you start to see, yes, there is an ROI by increasing health expenditure of the population, but it rapidly plateaus. And so this is raising the question with ministers and leaders, no matter where you are in the world, how do we address this and get a better ROI for our healthcare dollar? Because what we're doing today isn't working. If you look at the United States, Medicare has become unaffordable. If you look at the United Kingdom, the NHS is not viable financially. Look at Ireland, look at Europe, you're getting the same questions raised. How do we address this? It's up to not only politicians and policymakers, but us as clinicians and scientists. What is it we can do differently? That is what evolution has been asking. And if you think that this is something that is of concern just in this part of the world, no matter where you look, populations across the planet, Asia, Middle East, Europe, and North America, the same phenomenon is being experienced. In some countries, it's more acute. South Korea has a declining but aging population overall. It's declining. The birth rate is less than around 1.5. China, of course, their one-child policy has caused the same challenge. Japan, 1 in 3 people in Japan is now over the age of 60. That's a third of the population. And so the number of taxpayers who are available to support that population has been declining. It's an economic crisis, amongst others. Quick analysis of Mauritius. As we look at this, you just heard this non-communicable diseases are responsible for about 1/10 of the population's deaths right now. Diabetes, about 15%. And of course, obesity, 1 in 5. It's not where we see things in the Middle East, where they're almost double those numbers. But that's where things are heading as we look to the future. If you look at Saudi Arabia, it's one of the highest rates in the Middle East. 32% non-communicable disease. 1 in 3 Saudis now have a new non-communicable disease and are responsible for 3/4 of the deaths in the country now. And that is the health crisis. These are age-related diseases that are occurring earlier. And that's the message. We've defined age-related diseases based on your birth certificate. What we're seeing is some populations biologically age faster than other populations. The Middle East, South Asia, India, people of the Indian subcontinent like myself and many of yourselves who are of that genetic origin actually age faster. What I mean by that is the same disease that expresses itself in Europe and North America actually occurs about a decade, 5 to 10 years younger in our populations. So we have to rethink what is the impact of time in the environments that we're living in. Our genetics versus the environment we're looking are actually not correlating in a positive way. So what is evolution? I'm going to talk a little bit more. Evolution was created with this in mind. We're a global non-profit organization. Today we fund, and we'll talk a little bit about the different areas, we have 4 areas of focus. We fund research across the world, academic predominantly in either research centers or universities, and I'll talk a little bit about how that has been going on. We invest private capital, but 100% of the profits from the private capital are returned back into the foundation. We create or fund existing companies in the pre-IPO, that is non-publicly listed companies. We fund a number of initiatives as advocacy, whether it's ethics, whether it's supporting publications to look at the challenge. There's a paper just published last week by a consortium of scientists, some of whom are here, to actually look at the gaps in this field. It was published in the journal Nature Aging. And every now and then we look at this field and we ask ourselves, where's the field gone? Where's it today? And where do we think it's going to in the future? As we think about it, we actually have now grown. 5 years ago, last month, we were launched as an organization. I had the privilege of being the first employee, number one, the founding CEO. Today, as you'll see, we operate across the world as a global entity. Where do we touch this value chain? If I think about health as a value chain, all the way to the left is public opinion. We usually, scientists and clinicians, don't think about this. We thought about this from day one for a very important reason. If the public doesn't understand the importance of doing this, their political leaders will not be behind it and support it. We have to shape the narrative and we have to shape the conversation first and foremost in the public domain. Often we don't think about this. And in this field in particular, because there's a lot of people who actually get ahead of the data. They talk about the science in ways that the science actually isn't supported by the data. And this is a problem because today the definition of longevity can be anything from a supplement to a sauna, to a spa, all the way through to advanced molecular genetics and research. And getting to understand exactly what we're talking about and where this field is and where it's supported and where the evidence is very critical in getting public support. And we've been working on this. Another thing we found as we did this research across the world, we asked people in North America, in Europe, and in Asia a simple question. As you get older, what is important to you? Very simple question. Almost nobody said, I want to live longer. No, almost nobody said that. They actually asked for three things. They want to remain mentally functional, physically independent, and financially independent. Three things were consistent, no matter which culture. Mental, physical independence, and financial independence. There was a common word there, independence. It wasn't about living longer. It was living independently as long as they're meant to be in this life. The fourth was an interesting thing that surprised us, which is I don't want to be stigmatized as old. I don't want to go to the supermarket and have a geriatric section. I don't want to go to the fashion store and have a geriatric section. I want to be part of the mainstream population. So the whole narrative of what it means to be old has changed in the consumer's mind. And one of the things I've learned over the years, it's important for us to think of these stakeholders not as patients, but as consumers. We are all consumers. We avoid trying to become patients. And so coming at it with a medical lens is actually a false narrative for the population. And that's important to think about. If we're going to grow, whichever country you're talking about. Policymakers have to be part of this conversation because they fund, they support, they create the regulatory framework. Ultimately, government agencies are critical, whether it's the US NIH, the Medical Research Council in Europe, and all of this is critical. We are actively participating in every stage of this. Of course, at the center of this, academics, where all the research is done and they need to be supported and funded. This is a particular difficult time around the world in funding academia. The United States funding has been challenged at the NIH with our current administration. The UK is rethinking about how to fund, and we have to keep aging research at the center of this discussion because most of our healthcare costs are about aging-related diseases. That is a critical part of this. And I'm going to share at the end some examples of some success. Biotechs, much of the science has to go into biotechnology. By the way, there isn't a single drug that comes to market, with a rare exception of some vaccines, without the private sector. There isn't a single diagnostic that actually doesn't get scaled without the private sector. So while we think about the public, the academic, and the philanthropy in the private sector, in operational terms, it's one value chain. And we have to think about how to accelerate the private sector embracing this. Ultimately, Big Pharma is still responsible for the bulk of therapeutics, whether it's generics or branded. We still need the private sector, the Big Pharma and biotechs, and ultimately the regulator to approve these drugs to come to market. Let me turn now to some of the areas that we're working on. Funding today from Hevolution. We have committed over $400 million US in the last 24 months. We are the second largest funder of this field now in the world, second only to the US NIH. And given what's going on in the US, I don't know. What many of you may be surprised, in particular for my US colleagues, 5 of our research grants today fund scientists who are employed by the US NIH and their intramural program. When we launched, a number of scientists said, well, you know, we can work with academia, can you work? We are actually providing grants to the US NIH researchers today. That's one. Number 2, today as I speak to you, we have about 250 researchers around the world funded by Evolution. Across every continent except now South Asia. We have North America, South America, UK, Europe, and Far East, Singapore, not yet in South Asia. We're looking at how to move on to that. Our grantees are now contributing the future of, some of them, to future biotechs. The first 4 companies that are listed here, I'm pleased to say, all 4 were preclinical when we started. Today, all 4 companies have moved into human research. So as you think about progression, one of our goals was to accelerate this field. The fact that these companies have gone from preclinical research into actual human trials tells you that the field is now progressing. We are seeing human research, and I'll talk about 1 or 2 of these in a minute. Some of the institutions represented here are funded by Evolution. We're proud that Buck Institute was one of our first actual focused research institutions that funded, and really credit to Eric Verdon and his team, who's represented here today, because they were some of the pioneers that we were able to sit down with and come up with this collaboration. And these are a number of other partnerships that we have. And of course, we today convene the world's largest aging and health span meeting in Riyadh every other year. And I can give you an idea, the last meeting we held had 2,600 people come, 2,600 from 80 different countries. Now, what about looking to the future? We've recognized that we can only do this together if we come together. And how do we then overcome this challenge? Our research areas that we focused on, and the biotech, I'm going to take a few minutes just to give you a window into where that's going. We took an approach that we were going to fund companies, not science grants, we fund all stages of science grants. But on the company side, which many of you may not get exposed to as much, we said we're going to invest in companies that are targeting a known disease, that is scale, is global, so it can be democratized, but are attacking that disease with a neuroscience, aging biology perspective. Let me give you a couple of examples. And you'll be surprised the first example I'm going to give you. If you think about this, hepatitis B today is incurable. We have no cure for hepatitis B. Every clinician in this room will know that. We have a vaccine for it, but there are 2 billion humans, that's almost a quarter of the world's population, has been exposed and infected with this virus. There are an estimated 350 to 400 million humans walking around with chronically carrying this virus. About 15 to 20% of the population has been exposed. They're the ones who are spreading it to other people, and they are at risk of liver cirrhosis and cancer, hepatocellular cancer, because they are chronic carriers of hepatitis B. No treatment available today. The group of scientists that we were fortunate enough to meet asked a very interesting question. What is different about the 80% of humans that get infected with the virus and eliminate it, and 20% that get the virus and can't eliminate it, and yet the virus is the same? This is very topical because COVID, 90% of the deaths were people over 65. The young hardly ever had mortality, but it was the same virus. So do we treat the virus, or do we figure out what is it about the host, the infected body of the host, that is different? And one of the things you learn with HIV as a virus, and now we've learned with hepatitis B as a virus, is actually the virus accelerates the biological process of aging in the infected cell tissue. And somehow, some infected people have a faster aging process, it becomes older, and they cannot eliminate the virus. So this group of scientists came at this by saying, could we edit, not the genome, but the epigenome? So they came at it by editing the epigenome and using mice models infected with hepatitis B, They actually treated the mice not with an antiviral, but by editing the epigenome, they rejuvenated the cells of the liver in the mouse. That was then reproduced in other animals, including in primates. In monkeys, where the same experiment was done, edit the epigenome and see if the monkey will shed the virus. And bear with me, because to me this is one of the most exciting things, the way aging biology and aging research, it could potentially change our future. As I speak to you today, the first human trials of this approach to treat and cure hepatitis B are being done in humans today in New Zealand and Australia as I speak to you today. Think of the profound statement I just made. If this is successful, as it was in monkeys, as it was in rodents, if it's successful in humans, the future of medicine to treat a chronic viral infection will move from an antiviral as a toxin to rejuvenation of the host tissue so that your own immune system can kick the virus out. That is a profoundly different approach to medicine. So if somebody asks me today, how is aging research helping and how are we going to democratize? 350 million humans could benefit across every country and across every, because neuroscientists took a different approach to treating it. That's one example. The second example I will give you is in dermatology. Everybody here either knows somebody with psoriasis or has treated somebody with psoriasis. And I'm an endocrinologist by background. You know, if your traditional treatments don't work, then we give you systemic immunosuppressants and try and suppress the immune reactions to bring down the inflammatory process, because that's as good as we got. But if you ask the question in the psoriatic plaque, what is different about the part of the skin that is psoriatic versus in the same person, the adjacent skin tissue is relatively normal. If you start to sample this, you'll start to see an intense senescence in the skin lesion itself, in a fairly common, relatively common disease, which we don't think about as an aging-related disease. But the biology suggests the pathways are common to aging. So in this example, a group of scientists came together, built a company around it, and said, we're actually going to target the psoriasis by targeting the senescence through the skin, only in the skin lesions. That animal research has now progressed to humans. In fact, we just announced an MOU, not an MOU, an agreement in the Middle East to do some of the first human trials that are being done as multi-center trials across the world, including in the Middle East, in psoriasis using a geroscientist anti-aging process in a known disease. Now, what is going to happen in these examples I'm giving you? I can give you others. These are just two. What is going to happen is we've been asked the question repeatedly, what is the regulatory path of bringing a drug for aging to the market? Well, the other approach is you take a drug that is known to target aging in a known disease where the aging process is accelerated or heightened, get that approval, and then start to do human trials in other applications, whether it's in the skin or in the liver, wherever you look at, because now we're seeing aging, the immune system, and viral infection are actually converging biologically. And much smarter scientists than I will come and talk to you about a lot of that later today. So the approach that my friend and colleague Matt, for example, who's going to talk to you later, has been taking in dogs, is to say, how do we take a known drug that's known to have a path, overlaps with aging, but actually target the aging process? What I've just given you is built on that thinking to say, if I know a disease, and I can take it all the way, actually do the trial in a human, and accelerate the movement out into human trials. So these are exciting opportunities, and let me leave you with the concept. If what we're seeing over the last 5 years continues on the trajectory that we predict, then the $400 million investments we've made, and arguably the next $400 or $500 million we're going to make in the near future, is going to be a tiny, tiny drop in the ocean of impact. Think about 350 million humans who are waiting for some of these breakthroughs today. Think about all of the different organ systems. And so the question I will provoke you with is, how does Mauritius, given you have a unique population, well-defined, good infrastructure, excellent healthcare delivery, a developed economy, participate, and the same challenges of a declining population, an aging population, participate in this global ecosystem to be part not only the solution, but also benefit from it relatively early in the process. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. First question that's come in, what skills or training do you believe clinicians need most to deliver prevention-focused, longevity-based care?
So I've not practiced now in 20 years. So the first disclaimer there is my experience as a consultant endocrinologist is outdated, but I think some basics don't change. Number one, we have to remain critical, objective scientists. Assess the science. Let's not go after the trend du jour. Second, we have to keep an open mind. It's that balance of objectivity, but the courage to explore in new areas. I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Suggestions or ideas about practical steps Mauritius can take now to bring neuroscience into use?
It's a great question, and I'll give you an example of what we found in Saudi Arabia. When we started this journey in Saudi, there was not a single trained geoscientist in the kingdom. Lots of academic institutions, well-funded, all the rest of it. Not one scientist were actually trained in geoscience. We took the first young PhDs, sent them to several places around the world, and actually funded their postdoctoral programs to train them as postdocs in the best centers around the world, and more will be going to actually train as geoscientists, and then found a way to bring them back so they could set up their own programs. That is key to partner with the clinicians. Typically as MDs, we don't get that training, we need both. And of course, some of the trainees we've sent were actually MDs who wanted to do basic science. And we brought them together. Some of those are now coming back. I'll give a very quick, one of my young scientists, Yusuf, he's an amazing MD PhD who's decided he doesn't want to practice anymore. He's a vascular biologist, basically. And that's a perfect example of changing somebody's career. That's what we need, talent. Human capital is what Mauritius needs to build.
Fantastic. Last question for you. It has to do with the importance of data collection and perhaps tools like iCope and such. How can these help clinicians improve health span in real-world practice?
Well, there's some easy low-hanging fruit. We all know it, right? Stop smoking, exercise more, calories, etc., etc. All of that is table stakes. Our public health data, and I think the US is not a good example of that because we don't really have a national public. I think the UK and Europe are good role models to be able to, if you think about what the UK is doing in the biobank, if you look at our future health in the UK, these initiatives are actually getting us to understand not only the general population, but the next level down. And I think Mauritius is an example where with 1 million people or 1.2 million people, you could very quickly get a very detailed look at this population and not only benefit, but contribute in unique ways. That's a question we're asking in the Middle East, the same question. How do we contribute to that? And I think Mauritius becoming part of that global consortium and contributing to it, but also benefiting from it is the only way small countries, whether you're Qatar, you're Mauritius, doesn't really matter, we're going to have to do. How do we work together, I think is a regulatory and legal question. And while there are barriers, I can tell you from experience, they're not insurmountable. They have been overcome by multiple countries now to collaborate. Because the usual question comes up, it's human data, how do we pool, how do we share, it's biological tissues from humans. All of those are things we have to overcome, but don't take no as an answer, because they can be overcome. I can give you lots of examples where that's been done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Well, we are deeply grateful and genuinely inspired by Dr. Khan and by Hevolution's visionary leadership and its extraordinary commitment to advancing the science and solutions that will extend healthy longevity for people and communities everywhere. I hope you enjoyed his presentation, and I hope it sparked some imagination and some idea of where things can go. Our next speaker is someone who's been at the forefront of longevity research for decades. Dr. Brian Kennedy is professor of biochemistry and physiology at the National University of Singapore. and one of the world's leading voices in geroscience. His work explores how the biology of aging can be understood and translated into interventions that help people live longer, healthier lives. He'll be sharing lessons from Singapore, a nation that's become a true hub for healthy aging. In his talk titled Global Science, Local Impact, Singapore as a Center of Longevity Innovation. Please welcome Dr. Brian Kennedy.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to see everyone here. I have to say that I love following Makewood because he provides such a wonderful introduction to aging and global demographic changes that are happening. What I don't like about following him is he's such a good speaker that there's no way I can live up to that, but I'm going to do my best today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on around the globe, focusing somewhat on Singapore, but trying to talk more broadly than that. But first I want to give you a little bit of the history of longevity research. How did we get to where we are today? And it came from innovative funding sources. And the first one of those, well, first let me tell you about the history of longevity research, and I'll get to the funding sources. So this question really started in the 1800s. In 1825, there was an accountant for an insurance company named Gompertz who wrote the first mathematical equations to explain human mortality. And that Gompertz equation is still considered today by physicists and others who are trying to understand how we age. The first intervention that I know of that extended lifespan was calorie restriction, and that was in 1935. In the 50s, evolutionary theories of aging really rose to the forefront, and some of those theories are still followed largely today. The first genetic mutations to extend lifespan were really in the 70s and 80s, and the genes were cloned in the 90s and 2000s. And also in the 2000s, we had conserved pathways of longevity, remarkably across a wide evolutionary spectrum, from yeast cells all the way to humans. There are certain genes and pathways that modify the longevity process, like mTOR and sirtuins and others. And now, starting in around 2013, we've had aging clocks, biomarkers to measure how fast you're biologically aging. And I'm going to talk about those tomorrow. And then later that year, there were first papers came out on hallmarks and pillars of aging, and I'll touch upon that later. Much of this later stuff came about by innovative funding in the United States through the National Institute of Aging. And you can see here, this program started in 1975 and was doing a substantial amount of research funding throughout, all the way until today. Although I would also reiterate that U.S. funding is under threat, as it is in many parts of the world right now, and we have to keep funding geroscience. And so a lot of the discoveries came in the United States because the National Institute of Aging was funding the research there. But they also came through philanthropic support, and these are just some of the philanthropic organizations that support aging research through grants and other mechanisms. The American Federation for Aging Research, I want to highlight, they've done a lot of work. You can read a lot of the other ones. I do want to point out Evolution because it really is an amazing funding source for scientists doing geroscience right now. And it's really opened the doors globally for research to expand. Much of this research that has been funded up until the last few years was preclinical in nature. Yeasts, and worms, and flies. And so I want to take you through just 2 slides of the preclinical data, and then we'll get into the human story. So a lot of the major discoveries were driven by very simple model organisms. Yeast and worms and flies live only 2 weeks, and so you can do a lot of experiments very quickly. It's cheap to work on these organisms. And then you could follow that up by studying rodents, mostly mice and rats. There was a lot of work in cell culture to identify pathways linked to cell senescence and DNA damage and other things. There were longitudinal human studies that discovered genes linked to human aging, a lot of evolutionary biology, and a heavy focus on diseases of aging. If we look at what's happening now, there's a major transition in preclinical research, and I want to emphasize this because we still need to keep funding this research. Some of the biggest questions on aging are not answered yet. Why do we age? We still don't really know the answer to that question. Is it possible to slow or really even stop aging? I think everyone agrees we can slow aging now, at least it's possible. But stopping aging, is it possible? We don't know. And a lot of these preclinical models can really address these questions. So we're seeing a decline in these non-vertebrate models, and that's unfortunate because the simple organisms still have a lot to tell us. The cell culture work is now going to stem cell culture work. The human data that's available is making AI come to the forefront. And there are better designs now for rodent studies of aging that more mimic the human condition. And then also I think it's very important that we think about things like dogs and primates as research tools for aging. And by dogs especially, I mean companion animals, not dogs in laboratories. And you may hear a little bit more about that from Matt tomorrow. So I'm just going to leave you with 2 take-homes from all of this research and then move on. One, and this is a slide that Matt Caberline and I think it's the 20th anniversary of using this slide, some version thereof, the idea of going from sick care to health care. We have all of these diseases and we treat them still mostly like they're in silos. We train doctors to specialize in these areas. We do research in these areas. And what we've known for a long time now is that aging is the biggest risk factor for all of these chronic conditions and many others that I'm not listing on this slide. So why are we not focusing more on aging research? Why are we not targeting the factor that's driving all of these conditions that we don't want to get when we get older? The other is that we know a lot of pathways that modulate aging, hallmarks and pillars. I'm not going to go through these today. I think one point I want to make, and you can see that under the pillars on the right, is that these pathways are really interconnected to each other. It's not like 10 different things are going wrong independently to cause aging. You have a homeostatic process that's keeping you healthy, and as that network breaks down, then you start to get chronic diseases. So these pillars and hallmarks are all connected to each other. And I think what we're really looking at here is systems biology. Okay, enough preclinical models. It's time to get human. So what are we really doing? Well, I can tell you in our lab and many others now, we're focused on 2 things, interventions and biomarkers. Now, interventions need to be thought about broadly. It's not just drugs. The environment has a big impact on how people age. If people live near green spaces in urban environments, they're biologically younger. Lifestyle, I'm not going to talk in detail about this. Sleep, stress, diet, exercise, social connectivity, all of these things impact aging. And they need to be a focus for any sort of regulatory approach, government-based approach. We work a lot on supplements and drugs. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. And there are many other kinds of interventions. And before I just touch on those, I want to mention that the biomarker side is equally critical. If we can't measure how fast people are aging, then we can't test whether the interventions are actually working to slow aging or not. And tomorrow morning, if you're not sick of me already, I'm going to talk about biomarkers of aging, so I'll come back to that later. Now, there are many other kinds of interventions out there, not just, I mentioned supplements and repurposed drugs, but now there are longevity clinics doing all kinds of different things. There are medical devices, hyperbaric chambers, cryotherapy, a number of other things that are happening. You can go and get stem cells and exosomes now. You can go to get gene therapy to slow aging now in certain clinics around the world. I personally don't think we're ready for that to be prime time yet, but it just illustrates the fact that there's so much interest in people slowing aging. And we have to rapidly get an understanding of which of these interventions are safe and which of these interventions are efficacious. And meanwhile, the longevity industry has grown dramatically. I would say longevity is the biggest growth in the biomedical sector. But not just biotech companies and supplement companies. There are a lot of diagnostic companies that measure aging now. Med tech is growing. Longevity clinics I'll come back to later, but they're starting all over Earth, basically. I can't keep up with all of them. And even consumer companies are focusing heavily now on what do we do, how do we incorporate an aging population, how do we incorporate healthy longevity into our commercial strategies. And if you look at total financing, and I stole this, it's a different color for this slide because I stole it from Phil Newman at Longevity Technology. You can see that the funding in the biomedical sector is going up. So we're up to $8.2 billion funding in 2024. And so this is a dramatic improvement in the amount of money that's going into research and longevity. But I have to point out that I don't want to overplay this. If you look at that compared to funding for other things that are important in the world right now, you can see that aging in that red line at the bottom is a blip on the screen. And so funding for oncology in blue is 5 or 6 times higher than aging. Now, I think if aliens came down to Earth and you told them that 30% of the population gets cancer and 100% gets aging, and we're funding cancer at 5 times more than we're funding aging, they might say, well, no signs of intelligent life, we can leave right now. We need to rethink about how we're funding biomedical science. And that's not, I'm perfectly happy. I want cancer to be cured. I'm not against funding cancer, but we have to bring up longevity research a lot. So there are a lot of exciting companies coming on the board. Because Martin O'Day is here, and because I helped this company, I just listed one, which is called Alice. They work on biomarker, a clinical approach to helping people with longevity and measuring the biologic aging process, and I'll touch on that tomorrow. Let me go back to the demographics and talk about it in my way. Sorry, when I uploaded the slides, the green circles got moved slightly. But what you can see globally is that life expectancy at birth in 2019, was before the pandemic, was 73, and healthy life expectancy was 63. So there's a 10-year gap when you're losing health, but you're still alive, the 6 span. And so when we think about how we modify aging, we want to really make sure that we don't expand that 6 span. And I would argue that what medical treatments are doing right now, we wait till you get sick and then we treat you for these chronic diseases. We don't often completely cure these diseases. And so we keep people alive longer, which is a good thing, but it's also expanding that 6 span and it's driving healthcare costs. If we can make that window of time go down or at least go proportional to extending health span, it's an economic victory instead of an economic loss. So why am I talking about Singapore? Well, this is a recent measurement of healthy living years and life expectancy in Singapore. And this review ranks, you could argue about Singapore, Japan, or even a couple other of these countries, but this one listed Singapore first with a life expectancy of about 83.7 and a healthy life expectancy of 73.6. One thing you'll notice, by the way, is that gap, that years in ill health is almost the same everywhere in the world. And so that's something to think about as we go forward. So Singapore, by Dan Buettner, got identified as the 6th blue zone. All of the other blue zones are natural areas on Earth where people live a long time. There's one in Japan, there's a couple in Europe, there's one in North America and Central America. Singapore got identified as the first manufactured blue zone, meaning that the way the government has organized the society and the environment and how living basically in Singapore has led to a very long, healthy life expectancy. And this has been reported by the BBC and many other news organizations. I actually have no idea why the BBC decided that eating a lot of carbohydrates and noodles is a good way to live a long time. But they did report on this, and it's given Singapore a lot of press regarding healthy longevity. Now, if you look at the approaches up until recently in Singapore, they've been really organized around managing the aging process. And so you can see on the left here sort of a diagrammatic view. We need to get older people exercising. We need to get them on bicycles. We need to get better community-based and hospital care and build more hospitals. And then you can see the version in the Lancet here that's too hard to read and it doesn't really matter that much. But disease prevention is only one small sector of that. So the first thing Singapore really went after was not slowing aging. It was about how do we set up a culture and an environment and a healthcare system that's conducive to living a long time. And Singapore has a lot of the problems you've heard about already. By 2030, there's only 2 workers for every retired person. 30% of the population is going to be over 65. And there's just no economic solution to solve this unless we keep people healthy longer. And this kind of data, which is global, not just Singapore, has led me and others to argue that aging is the biggest challenge of the 21st century. It's not COVID. Everybody thought about COVID, but it was really, who died from COVID? It was really people over the age of 65, for the most part, that succumbed to COVID because they lost resilience. And so we need to do something about slowing aging in the current demographic situation really on Earth. There's 2 billion people over 65 in 2050. And a lot of people think this field is about billionaires, but it's really about billions. It's about those 2 billion people that we need to think about. But the new plan for Singapore, which is not officially out yet, so I asked Google, I know I'm involved in it, but I can't talk much about it, but Google AI Mode could compile all the statements made by Singapore government officials about where this is going. And you can see that the focus is changing. Longevity is being identified as a key national priority for RA 2030, which is the Research, Innovation, and Enterprise program. The goal is to improve the quality of life by delaying biologic aging and preventing age-related diseases to extend health span. So I'm very encouraged by this. I think it reflects a forward-thinking, innovative approach, and it's one of the first ones that I've seen it written in this way from a government that's really trying to tackle the aging challenge in their population. If we come to the National University of Singapore and what we've been doing, we've started a number of programs now that really focus on trying to understand aging. The Healthy Longevity Translational Research Program was started in 2020. We have 40 faculty now working on basic biology of aging, translational approaches to aging, and age-related diseases. We also have a Center of Healthy Longevity, which is much more clinically focused, testing interventions in humans in clinical trials to see which ones slow the aging process. And we've also joined the Life Sciences Institute in 2024, which helps us expand the program even more. There are a number of affiliated programs also. There's a reproductive longevity and equality program that was started that the intent of is to understand ovarian aging and to improve and extend the period of fertility, but also to mitigate some of the challenges that happen after menopause in the female population. There's an Academy of Healthy Longevity by Andrea Meyer, which does research, but it also has a number of educational programs that are designed to train the clinicians and the scientists and even the executives in terms of what longevity, healthy longevity looks like and how to implement it in their context. So that's one way we're trying to tackle the problem of not having enough people skilled in understanding longevity. There's a Memory and Aging Center, a Sleep and Cognition Center, and a number of others that are associated with the program as well. So this is becoming quite large. The preclinical research is really trying to address the links between aging and chronic disease, use translational approaches to develop new drugs and interventions, and measure biologic aging in the Singapore population, and also to look at epidemiology. Singapore has many of the same ethnicities that throughout Southeast Asia, including Mauritius, including a substantial Indian population in Singapore, as well as Chinese and Malay. So it's a very diverse environment, and it's made up of ethnicities that are understudied with regard to aging. On the translational side, it's really about developing and testing small molecule interventions, adapting healthy lifestyle interventions to Singapore, and also getting personalized. We need to understand which interventions work best in which people and what the downstream effects of that are. So personalization, precision, these are key words as we develop healthy longevity. And so this is something that the Dean, Chong Yap Singh, and I have been working on, and it's really what is needed as we move forward in Singapore. We need biologic aging clocks that are adapted not only to Singapore populations, but to individuals. We need to know which aspects of health we're measuring, and we have to have a validity. We have to be able to be predictive and responsive for interventions. And so what we've started doing is something like what happened at the National Institute of Aging, where they did an intervention testing program in mice. We're developing a rapid clinical trials program in humans where we can go through different drugs and supplements and other interventions that may slow the human aging process and measure and validate those as quickly as possible. We also have a big challenge. These clinics are starting all over the world, and I'm generally supportive of longevity clinics, but they're doing all kinds of different things. Sometimes, in my opinion, it extends beyond the realm of safety. And so Singapore is a very regulated environment. It's hard to set up a longevity clinic there. And so the approach we're trying to take is to set up a different kind of ethics approval process that's more tolerant of interventions that don't have strong efficacy but still have safety, to allow clinics to come into a respected environment like Singapore, set up and develop this industry in the island. But there's a challenge to that. the backside of the story is they're going to have to share data with the government so that the government can independently evaluate safety and look at large data to see how to help these clinics move their support from small groups of people coming into the clinic into the entire population. So this strategy is being developed right now, and hopefully we can implement it so that we can set up a controlled environment where clinics can come in, try different interventions, and see what works in a safe way. And this kind of thing is already happening in other places. For instance, the Bahamas has a strategy to do this. And so it's more based on regenerative medicine, but there's an advisory board now around the global advisory board that looks at clinics that want to come into the Bahamas, evaluates the interventions they're doing, and determines whether they're safe and can be moved forward. So a number of countries are now trying to do this, and I think that might be an interesting way to build an industry in a place like Mauritius, where people want to have healthy longevity. There aren't a lot of clinics yet. And by establishing a smart, forward, innovative thinking regulatory process, it may be possible to do that in an efficacious way. Now, when you look at Singapore and Mauritius, they're not that different. Singapore's a little farther down the process. There's more people over 65. But these pyramid curves look pretty much the same. Mauritius has an aging issue that's rapidly developing. And so the question is, what can be done in Mauritius to really facilitate healthy longevity? How can it help its population? How can it develop business? And we'll be talking about that later, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I just want to end by saying there's a lot of different possibilities here. But I think it has to start with population health. And this is really about democratization. It's fine to have clinics doing expensive things, and if they work, that's great. Maybe we can scale them and make them cheaper. But ultimately, we need a strategy where we can really help everyone in the population so that everyone has accessibility to a longer health span. And that's one of the things. Everything we do academically in Singapore is based on low-cost interventions and relatively low-cost measurements of aging that can be scaled rapidly. Longevity clinics are certainly a possibility here. I already mentioned that. Consumer businesses are now talking a lot about healthy longevity and aging populations in their consumer marketing approaches. And I think this is really an opportunity for innovation, because really there's no country that's fully grasped the importance of geroscience and healthy longevity yet. I think Singapore is getting close. I think many countries like the US are so befuddled right now that they aren't capable of developing a really progressive approach to this. So this is an opportunity for countries like Singapore, like Saudi Arabia, to get in front of this and be leaders in the next most important step in healthy longevity. And it's also an opportunity for other places to enter the game, like Mauritius. So I'm happy to help with that in any way possible, and I want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions. I think I'm even a minute early, so thank you.
Oh, thank you, Brian. One question that
came up, I was looking over there.
I know, I snuck up on you.
Dangerous guy.
By the way, Brian set me on this path over 10 or 12 years ago. So I have a lot that I owe to Brian. One of the questions that came in, I think there's going to be some questions around what approaches the entire country could take. But one individual wrote, what are some potential, while things are being explored and developed, what are some potential basic lifestyle interventions that are available to people today?
Well, I think that, this is not an all or none process, healthy longevity. It's incremental. If you can get people taking small steps toward a healthier lifestyle, exercising more and better, eating better. A large percentage of this population has diabetes. That's an accelerant for aging for sure. Improving sleep quality, easier said than done, but important. All of these, and managing stress, all of these things, if you can make incremental steps with the population or with individuals, they will improve their health. So you don't have to wait for stem cells and drugs. Those may be great as they get developed, but there are already things that can be done. And I think it is personalized. The best exercise for me may not be the best exercise for you. There's a lot of overlapping things that are general, and I think it's a deep discussion, but getting people educated and engaged in lifestyle is a great first start.
I guess one of the questions that came up is, can you share an example of how local or regional policies have been implemented or in the country, in Singapore, and that have translated into positive outcomes?
So I think they're really in the process of implementing geroscience now. That we'll see how that goes. But there have been a lot of other initiatives that have happened in Singapore, like Healthier SG, which gives people apps and encourages them to be more active and take more steps, and then there's a reward mechanism if they do that. There are a lot of community-based centers that have gyms and people that are trained in them that can work with people over 65 to improve their exercise. So there are a lot of sort of lifestyle things that have been developed so far, and I think now they're entering the realm of, geroscience in terms of drugs and supplements and other types of interventions.
That's fantastic. Maybe two questions combined into one. I'm laughing to see the Brian Johnson question.
Yeah. My favorite question.
You're going to be talking about aging clocks tomorrow, but when we talk about maybe biomarkers, how can people today who are not Brian Johnson approach what biomarkers are important, what kind of conversations they should be having with their medical providers, and what are your thoughts about Brian Johnson and that end of the spectrum?
Yeah, there are a whole range of biomarkers out there, and let's remember there are a whole range of preclinical markers for disease progression that overlap with biomarkers of aging, glucose, blood pressure. Everybody should be doing their basic medical prevention, seeing their general doctors, getting these things measured, catching things as early as possible, and intervening to prevent disease progression. And one of the things I'll argue tomorrow is that if you intervene with a beta blocker or metformin or something, you not only prevent that trajectory down that one disease, but you keep the whole network functioning better and preserve health longer. So earlier intervention is the key. I think when it comes to Brian Johnson, first of all, I am supportive of hackers. I think if people want to educate themselves and adopt whatever sort of longevity styles for their own body that they want to do, that should be their choice. We need to empower people to make their own health decisions. However, I think that there's not enough science behind his protocol. One of the key challenges, and I met him, by the way, he's very nice to me. He came up to me and he said, "You're that doctor that says bad things about me." And I said, "Well, I'm not the only one, but I think that the problem, I'll give you one problem, I don't want to take too much time. There might be a number of supplements and drugs that work to slow aging, but you can't just stack them all together and expect that 20 different things is going to give you 20 times the effect. A lot of these interventions impact the same pathway, and you can hit that pathway too hard and have negative effects. And I liken it to the fact that if you mix 20 colors of paint together, you're going to get some ugly brown color of paint out in the end. We don't know how to combine interventions, and we don't know which ones work in which people. And so the idea of just stacking everything together, I think, is a dangerous strategy right now. So I'm okay with him doing it for his body, but he's marketing that now, and I just want people to, I don't care if they market things and make money, but there should be good science behind it, and I don't think that's there yet.
I agree. One last question, and just wondering, you mentioned personalized medicine and maybe precision medicine in a way, but speak a little bit to just the variability between like you and I. How would we be different, and why is that important, and how does that affect your thinking about taking care of?
Well, I think from an interventional standpoint, there's probably no intervention that works in 100% of the population. Even exercise. Sure, some form of exercise may benefit almost everybody, but it's different levels. Maybe running a marathon is good for you, but if I do it, it's too much for me. So I think that we need to understand what the individual can deal with, and that's why I think we sort of need iterative biomarkers so we can measure over time what's happening with different interventions to aging clocks and other kinds of aging markers, and then try to optimize the individual. And that's something I'll talk about more tomorrow.
Fantastic. Brian, thank you so much. It's really
a pleasure. Thank you.